Coming up, an Alaska Native goes to Congress. An Oglala artist takes top honors, sovereignty and jurisdiction in Oklahoma, plus Orange Shirt Day in Canada. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa. Thank you for joining us. We start in Oklahoma, where the leader of the Cherokee Nation delivered his annual State of the Union address. Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. delivered his speech via phone and a pre-recorded message. He was in isolation following a rebound case of COVID-19. The remarks highlighted many of his upcoming plans. One of the new proposals he revealed was the Cherokee Nation Violence Against Women Act, which he said will help protect victims of domestic abuse. Hoskin Jr. also announced his nation will hold its Elder Summit with a new focus on protecting this group from fraud. He also addressed another big topic.
Language is our culture. Our language is part of that unbroken chain that links us back to our creation. That chain will not be broken on our watch.
The Cherokee State of the Union address happens every year and is an opportunity for the Cherokee leader to address their nation. Citizens from the 5 tribes that make up the Chinook Indian Nation are coming together to highlight their need for federal recognition. Last week, Chinook citizens rallied on the steps of a federal building in Seattle, Washington, to raise awareness for their long fight. The nation briefly had federal recognition, but in 2002, the Bush administration revoked that status. Chinook Chairman Tony Johnson says regardless of the government's confusion, his nation's sovereignty comes from its land and ancestors. At the rally, Johnson said his great-great-grandfather and other leaders have been fighting to get their lands back since the 1890s. Federal recognition would mean access to federal dollars for healthcare and housing for Indigenous nations in the southwestern part of the state. Chinook leadership says the rally is just the start of a campaign to pressure state lawmakers to use their influence to get the nation recognized. Inflation has upset food supply and access across the country, but Native Americans living in urban areas are especially hard hit. This group accounts for 70% of the country's Native population. One Indigenous chef is getting creative to make sure urban Native families have access to the foods of their ancestors. ICT senior producer Vincent Moniz has the story.
Indigenous foods like wild rice, bison, and fresh vegetables are often not available for urban Native families with low incomes. And the recent inflation spike has pushed these healthy foods even further out of reach. Menominee citizen Jessica Pomonikut is the executive chef of a Native American catering service in Chicago, Illinois. Pomonikut says food prices and shipping costs have risen so much that her parents now grow the native foods her catering business depends on.
Well, being a very small business, inflation has hit me hard. Normally, catering business, they can order things in wholesale and bulk, and I don't have that luxury. I order based on whatever orders I have at the time, which, at times hasn't been much during the pandemic.
U.S. inflation surged to a new 4-decade high in June, squeezing household budgets with painfully high prices for gas, food, and rent. In spite of this, several Midwest Native community leaders are working to expand urban access to healthy and traditional Native cuisine. But Chef Pomonikut says that mission is becoming less affordable each day. Today, it costs her nearly double to prepare what she calls a Menominee expression of love. And not even the open road will stop her from sharing that.
Sometimes I drive up to northern Wisconsin. Sometimes I drive to Minnesota. Sometimes I drive, hundreds of miles to get the things that I need. I've driven 500 miles for wild rice before.
Even with Pomonikut's limited access to indigenous foods in her city, her aim is still to offer healthy meals to the Chicago Native community and educate people about indigenous contributions to everyday American cooking. In Bismarck, North Dakota, Vincent Moniz, ICT News.
While a major city's economic development efforts will receive millions, the U.S. Economic Development Administration announced that Tulsa, Oklahoma will receive a $38.2 million grant as part of the Build Back Better American Rescue Plan. The funds will be used by a Tulsa-based coalition of organizations, and the lead of the project will be the Indian Nations Council of Governments. The council is a voluntary association of local and tribal governments. Their mission is to provide planning and economic development services to 50 cities and towns, including the Cherokee, Muskogee, and Osage nations. Moving forward, the group plans to create new opportunities for research and development projects, all in hopes of creating up to 40,000 jobs. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, our future is rooted in the past and the Mcgirt decision from a historic context. Plus, Sitting Bull inspires a modern-day artist. But first, an Alaska Native goes to Congress. Stay with us. Mary Peltola is set to fill the late Representative Don Young's term in the U.S. Congress. She is the first Alaska Native to serve. ICT's Mackenzie Allen Charmley talked with her earlier this summer.
I'm the mother of 4, and I have 3 stepkids, and I now have 2 grandchildren. And I just really understand how important families are, for everyone. Family is everything for most people. And a lot of the challenges that we face are things like housing. I think housing shortage and finding housing that people can afford with regular jobs has become increasingly challenging, not only for renters, but now to buy a house. Most young people, especially, but many people are priced out of being able to buy a home. And as a mom, I've just realized that the most critical thing that I can provide for my children is a safe, peaceful, and loving home. And if you don't have resources to control where you're living, that is very, very challenging. And those are just really basic human needs, and it's just becoming increasingly harder to meet those basic human needs. I also think that healthcare is a critical issue, and affordable healthcare and even access to healthcare is getting more and more challenging. So that is another issue that I'm very concerned about. I believe we need to invest more in our schools. There's a terrible teacher shortage throughout the nation, and certainly Alaska is part of, we're realizing how many teachers we're short on. I think the number's about 1,200 teachers we're going to be looking for this year across the state of Alaska. So those are some of the issues. And another thing for working families is food security.
Peltola sees the need to balance economic needs and the health of the land.
We are a resource development state. We're a resource extraction state. We always have been. That's how we pay our bills, is through oil predominantly, and certainly fishing and mining and timber and other resources. And I think that we've really got to find people who are in elected office who are concerned about balancing out our need to pay our bills with environmental impacts. And I'm certainly pro-development, but I think it's very, very important that any development project that goes forward, there is social license to operate from the people who live closest to that project, meaning there needs to be the people who live close to the project have a level of comfort with the risk inherent in whatever that development project might be, especially balancing out what their economic return is to their region, what kind of jobs will be available for the people who live closest to that resource development project. I also think it's important that as we're meeting the needs of our short-term oil and gas demands, that we're looking at our long game and investing 10 times that in renewable energy sources. We've just got to get committed and recommitted to finding renewable energy options as we go forward.
Peltola is the first Alaska Native ever to be elected to the U.S. Congress.
Well, I just find it surprising that in 2022, we haven't had an Alaska Native as part of our congressional delegation. And we've been a state over 50 years, and it just seems surprising given the economic impact that our Native corporations have in our state and the role that Alaska Natives play in every aspect of Alaska, not just the economy. I've just been happy to be in the race. I think that Native people tend to be less partisan. We tend to be platform Republicans or platform Democrats. A lot of our issues don't fit neatly into either party. I think that one of the biggest challenges that we face as a state and as a nation is our extreme partisanship, and it's really dividing a lot of us. And we're already a pretty segregated society, even though we have laws that force integration. I think that we tend to gravitate to what we're comfortable with and what we know. And now we're seeing this, we're becoming even more segregated on party lines. And with real enemies now internationally, with Russia and Iran, with China, I think it's so important as Americans that we talk about working together and partnerships and coalition building and not seeing each other as enemies, but really working together. And I think that it's really important for us to watch our language and the way that we communicate about things, because words carry a lot of power and a lot of meaning. And I think it's just very important that we de-emphasize the things that make us different. For many years, minority groups have felt disenfranchised and forgotten and not at the table. And we're getting to the point now where even Caucasian people, men who have typically felt like they are part of the fabric, now everybody, including Caucasians and men, are feeling disenfranchised and forgotten and not part of the discussion. And I think that we need to recognize that and just work on making sure that everybody's at the table, everyone feels included, and we're using language that is inclusive of everyone.
That was Congresswoman-elect Mary Peltola in an interview from early August. When we come back, an Oglala artist takes the bull by the horns. The bison defined a way of life for many tribes across the country. Every part of the animal was used for clothing, tools. Even the bladder carried the water for the Plains Indians. The buffalo horn was used for a spoon. Now Kevin Poyer has elevated the humble spoon to an incredible piece of fine art. He's back home in South Dakota after winning top prizes at the Santa Fe Indian Market.
This year, I had made a couple of things new. One of them was a buffalo horn spoon that would honor Two-Spirit people, and so this was really a different piece I'd ever approached, and it did win a first place. And then another piece I made was a belt that represented all our Lakota medicines, and beautiful, inlaid with every color that I use: reds, greens, blues, whites. And that one won the first place, and the spoon won the honorable mention. But yeah, we did pretty good. It's a tough market down there, beautiful pottery and baskets, and one artist with buffalo horn stuff that no one's ever seen before. So it's really hard to educate that many people when no one's ever seen it before.
Lakota people traditionally used a buffalo horn for a spoon.
Working on a spoon, I really try to tell different stories. There's a lot of issues in Indian country, but about our identity, loss of land. There's stereotypes about Native Americans that I try to switch around and put dominant culture in in our position to make them see certain things through our eyes. And so I guess some of that imagery has been controversial because the viewer then is all of a sudden having to see things through how we experience things about identity. But with this two-spirit, I was talking with a two-spirit fella, and he wanted to bring awareness to the two-spirit people. And so it took a couple of months just visiting and trying to research two-spirit in Native culture. And we finally decided on a design, and we worked it out. And it took probably a year or so working on it in the process, and then making it took all summer from springtime till August.
Butterflies play a huge role in Poyer's work.
There's a real famous photo of Sitting Bull with a monarch butterfly wing in his hat band. And a lot of people didn't really notice it because it's all black and white. And so I talked about that butterfly a lot, but I never knew the story about it. And anyway, during one of our ceremonies, I had a butterfly come to me, and I was told like 6 months later after I mentioned it that every time I saw a monarch butterfly or a butterfly, I would be reminded of our lifeways. And so I see it's so beautiful when I see a butterfly. Sometimes when I most need it, it grounds me and reminds me who I am and keeps me in check. And so the monarch butterfly, I've noticed, connects with almost everybody who stops and sees my work with a butterfly on it. And it all kind of is about the same thing, about remembering a loved one or something special in their lives. And they really connect with the monarch butterfly imagery that I do on my pieces.
That was Oglala artist Kevin Poyer. In Canada, preparations have begun for the country's second ever National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Also known as Orange Shirt Day, the holiday recognizes the legacy of the Canadian residential school system. APTN's Fraser Needham has the story.
This year, our focus is remembering the children who were taken from their families and subjected to cruel abuse in an effort to suppress the culture and traditions of Indigenous peoples.
That's National Center for Truth and Reconciliation Executive Director Stephanie Scott talking about the upcoming TRC Day. The Trudeau government is investing $4 million in 278 community projects as part of National Truth and Reconciliation Week. Part of this funding will also go to the Ottawa event and a TRC Education Week for Canadian students in grades 1 through 12. At the press conference, Ottawa Centre Liberal MP Yasser Naqvi spoke about what he sees as his role in truth and reconciliation.
I'm an immigrant to this country, and therefore I'm a settler. And it is my responsibility to continue to learn about our tragic past and participate in not only learning but teaching my 2 young children as well.
And Saskatchewan residential school survivor Eugene Arcand talked about what survivors expect of the non-Indigenous population.
We want you to know who we are. Know our names, know our numbers. And we don't want your pity. Don't think for a second that we do what we do because we want people to feel sorry for us. Those days are done. We want real reality. We want to share these truths with adults, but more importantly with young people, because that's who's going to change this country.
Nunavut survivor Lavinia Brown spoke about how she managed to retain her language in spite of attending residential school.
I kept my language from our grandparents. Our grandparents, our ancestors were our strong tools to survive our culture. Yes, I speak my language.
The September 30th Ottawa event takes place right here on LeBreton Flats and will be broadcast live on APTN. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
In May 2020, the Supreme Court's Mcgirt decision ruled that the Creek Nation continues to have reservation status throughout eastern Oklahoma. It means that the state could not try a Muskogee citizen for crimes within that part of the state. The tribe retains jurisdiction. Oklahoma state officials predicted chaos and countered with lawsuits. Indigenous leaders say this is not the case. Some even say there's growing evidence that tribes and local jurisdictions are finding new ways to work together. ICT's Mark Trahant talked to law professor Robert Miller about the case. Let's take a look.
Robert Miller is a professor of law at Arizona State University. He is an enrolled citizen of the Eastern Shawnee Tribe and interim Chief Justice for the Pasco Yaqui Tribe Court of Appeals and sits as a judge for other tribes. He's been following the Mcgirt versus Oklahoma and recently wrote a piece on the economic impact. He joins us now. Welcome, Professor Miller.
Thank you very much.
There was a phrase in there that really struck me, and when I read it, I wanted to call you, and that was the idea that there was a promise made with the Trail of Tears, and it implies economics.
On July the 9th, 2020, Justice Gorsuch's opinion was released, and the opening sentence is, "At the end of the Trail of Tears was a promise." I knew we had won, or the tribe had won, excuse me, when that sentence was written, because the promise was the treaty promise that the reservation would be there and would exist forever.
So much of the narrative building up to the case and even after has been about economic calamity, when in fact the evidence that you present is that working together is a stronger case.
Absolutely. And Justice Gorsuch, in his opinion, had noted that for decades, Oklahoma has engaged in cooperative agreements and signing contracts, in essence, with the tribal governments to handle all sorts of issues, gaming, tax, alcohol, all sorts of issues. And so Justice Gorsuch hoped that his opinion would lead to a continuation of that, and the state and the Indian nations would work together.
This is a challenging time, given the changing nature of the Supreme Court. How does the case get made that this was really important and there's a reason to stick with this path?
I've written several articles and have a book coming out on Mcgirt, and I call it a bombshell case. The state went, let's pick the plaintiff in that case, or the tribe in that case. The Muskogee Creek Nation had only about 135,000 acres of what's defined as Indian country on July the 8th. July the 9th, we wake up and find out that Indian country for the Muskogee Creek Nation is 3.25 million acres. And now something like 43% of eastern Oklahoma is Indian country. 1.8 million Oklahomans now find out they live on a reservation. That's a bombshell, however it turns out. It presents a challenge for the tribal governments, for the state government, and for the federal government. It's a bombshell.
This is an election year, of course, and the opportunity for states like tribes to reconfigure happens all the time. Is there still more that can be built on this?
Oh, absolutely. If the state leaders and the Governor Stitt, if they got on board with what the Supreme Court decided 2 years ago. But as you said earlier, they argued to the Supreme Court that the sky would fall, criminal jurisdiction, that thousands of criminals would be released, and yes, economic bombshell. Wait, that's my word. Economic catastrophe. And none of those things have come true. But the state has not reconfigured their position. Barely a year ago, the Oklahoma legislature set aside $10 million to hire attorneys to fight the case. And it led to this Castro Huerta case that the Supreme Court decided June 29, 2022. So that case is in reaction to Mcgirt, but it doesn't change Mcgirt at all. People have made a mistake in saying that Castro Huerta affected or changed Mcgirt. It did not. The reservations are still in place. The tribal criminal and civil jurisdiction that it had because of Mcgirt remains the same after Castro Huerta.
One of the, I guess, what are the lessons for other states here as they have relations with tribes?
Well, the Mcgirt case was a one tribe, one treaty specific situation. The old Indian Territory, Congress mandated, we'll let you, Oklahoma, become a state, but you have no jurisdiction over Indian nations or over their lands. So that's specific to that state. But the new way that the Supreme Court, led by Justice Gorsuch, is considering Indian law cases, and treaties are real contracts, they still apply, and they must be followed pursuant to the Constitution, Article 6. They are the supreme law of the land. So that does reverberate across other tribal court cases across the United States as the Supreme Court addresses and the lower federal court addresses these issues.
That was law professor Robert Miller. Well, summer is coming to a close, and to say a fond farewell, let's take a look at the Kettle and Stony Point First Nations powwow from ICT's Miles Morrisseau. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand, just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
The ICT Newscast is produced by Indig Public Media. This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.